Welcome to another fun week of When Will We Get M1X Macs, our long-running series where I tell you that it could be in the next couple of weeks. With me, your friendly Apple Shill. I'm iCaveDave and I simplify Apple so that everything just works for you, and if you want the latest Apple leaks, news and rumours every weekday at 12 UTC, like this video, subscribe to the channel and ring my bell. And we're not going to dwell on the events news today. I did ask the audience on Twitter, where you should of course be following me at iCaveDave, whether they thought that we would see the invites this week or not, and it was split right down the middle. It was like 51-49 when I checked. Mark Gurman in the weekly newsletter said soon and by the end of the year, so no real clues there, but as long as we see them fairly soon, I'm down. And I'm still hoping for that upgraded Mac Mini 2 with M1X inside. And there's a good reason that I'm after one. So you've seen the new set here on the iCave, but there's actually quite a lot more to come. Over the coming weeks, the desk end is going to be getting a serious overhaul, including an electric adjustable height desk, and a much easier to start streaming setup so that I can much more easily jump on a live video as and when the need arises, as well as being able to help me kind of close my rings when I'm working at home. Might even get one of those wobble board things. So I'm planning to declutter and do some repainting as well, so if you've got any ideas, suggestions for things that have worked for you in your home office spaces, especially if you happen to have an electric standing desk, because I think cable management on that is going to be pretty interesting to do. Any accessories that you love, any tips that you have for me, please do let me know down in the comments, and I'd actually really like to feature some viewer setups again too. We did it months and months ago, probably 6 months ago, so if you would like to have your setup featured, feel free to DM me on Twitter. I know that you've just started following, so that's fine. DM me on Twitter with some photos, description of your kind of setup, and I'd love to feature some more on the show. Anyway, not much in terms of news today, so we're going to get straight to your iCave answers. Want your question answered? Just use hashtag iCaveAnswers down in the comments with your question. First up, Marcin Kowalczyk asks, iCaveAnswers alter iCave. If the first ever Apple product were an 80s iPhone instead of a Mac, would this in your opinion alter computing and Apple as we know it today? So this is kind of a crazy way of putting a question, because it's so difficult to imagine. If we were talking way back in the 80s, we didn't have mobile phones back then, so I guess it would be like a home phone, so it would be a communications device. We also didn't really have internet at that point to any real degree, so having a phone would have literally just been a phone, I guess. It would have been one of those phones that sits there, and maybe Apple would have developed some of the technologies behind actually getting the internet itself up and running. It would have been some sort of Apple communicator type device. Now, a little bit further on into the early 90s, we did see things like the Newton line, which was very much along the lines of what the iPhone and the iPad became down the line, but in a time when you were kind of maybe sending faxes through it and that kind of thing, and very much when you were on a local network, it wasn't something that had its own cellular connection. But these kind of PDAs where you could actually get a little bit of handwriting recognition going and that sort of thing, I think is probably the way that it would have ended up going. Apple would have used that as their kind of computing platform rather than the desktops that they started with at the time. Really interesting question, but I think to have started it in the 80s would have been ahead of where the technology could possibly have allowed it to go, not having an internet or really cell phones at the time. Basic7 asks, iCaveAnswers, do you think that Apple will make an M2 MacBook Air with the old design? Apple might keep the old design around for a discounted price after the new one comes out. So I guess this comes down to the fact that we've heard that the M2 MacBook Air with the redesign that we've been hearing about is looking like it's going to go into production in Q3 of 2022. Now that obviously doesn't line up with what we were expecting. We were expecting maybe to be getting the M2 chips in the spring with this new design, but that's not what the supply chain looks like it's saying right now. So at the moment it looks like it's going to come a little bit later in the year. I don't expect that Apple would put an M2 chip into the old style MacBook Air and then also put it into a new style MacBook Air. That doesn't make too much sense. If they're going to keep the old design around, I think it will be with an M1 inside and not with an M2. But fingers crossed we don't have to wait as long as Guoming Chi thinks. James Apple asks, iCaveAnswers, where did you get that shirt, Dave? I need that Apple shirt. So that's actually the one that I'm wearing again today, this Apple shirt. And It's a tricky one because if you don't live in California, it's going to be very difficult to get your hands on it, because this is one of the ones that comes from Apple's campus shop, the kind of on-site shop. In fact, this is an older one. This comes from the One Infinite Loop campus, so this is before the Spaceship campus existed. They do have an Apple store on site which sells exclusive stuff, kind of to make it a bit more special, I guess. And yeah, this was one that I picked up on eBay, actually for about £14, I think, which is a bargain. Rob asks, iCaveAnswers, is the M1 iPad Pro 11-inch 2021 Generation 5 or 3rd generation? It should be 5th generation iPad Pro, but it says 3rd generation on the About the iPad section. Okay, so here's the crack. It's the 3rd generation of the 11-inch model. So prior to the 11-inch, so we've had the A12X, the A12Z, and the M1, which is the current one. Those are the only ones in that 11-inch chassis with that design. Previous to that, it was 10.5-inch, I believe, for the iPad Pro, for the smaller one, which is what then went into the iPad Air afterwards. So it's a 5th generation iPad Pro of the smaller size, or in fact, I think it might be a 4th generation. I don't think they did the smaller size straight away. I think there was a generation of 12.9 before they brought in the smaller size. But that's why. It's because it's 3rd generation of this 11-inch design. Alan B Unboxings and News asks, iCaveAnswers, why did the Apple Watch Series 7 in product red never got a pre-order on October the 8th, 2021, but Apple said the Apple Watch Series 7 in product red was going to be for pre-order. So basically, why did we not get to pre-order the product red Apple Watch? Were we able to? Well, if it wasn't there for pre-order, I'm not sure, but it's on Apple's site now. You can buy it. It's a thing. Maybe there was an issue with the colouring. Maybe there was an issue with the anodizing in some way. Or maybe they just didn't have enough stock on the initial pre-order days. But it's right there right now, and you can pre-order it, because they're not out yet. Also, this is a really long question, the way that you've typed it. Could everyone just try and keep them down to like a couple of lines? It just makes it easier if I've got to read it all out. Thanks ever so much. And Ludo asks, sorry I'm not attempting your surname. Hashtag a question. I want to buy a laptop. For Windows laptops, I have a problem. All the big companies like MediaMart and internet dealers have laptops from HP, but the models that you see all have different product numbers. For example, an MV laptop have all different product numbers and different specifications. As a potential client, you can't compare even when you're on the official website of HP. Only one brand stands out, and that is Apple. Wherever you watch, you see the same products with the same number and specs. Are there computers produced for the big electronic chains and they're all different? Can you give me an answer? I have the intention of buying a MacBook Air with the latest processor, so I want to know what to buy. Greetings, Ludo. Belgium. So yeah, this is actually one of the big things that Steve Jobs did when he returned to Apple, was he wanted to make everything a lot more simple, and actually he never managed to get it to the level of simplicity that we've got now with the M1 MacBooks, and even when we get the M1Xs coming soon. Look at what Apple has done in terms of the iPhones and the iPads. You don't have like 4 different processor options in an iPad. You have an iPad or you have an iPad Pro. And if you have the cheap iPad, then you'll get a slightly older processor, which has got a number that tells you how old it is. And if you go for the iPad Air, which is the most current one, then you'll get the current iPhone chip. And if you want to go for the Pro, then you get the X chip, or now the M1 chip, or the M2 chip, which basically is the same generation of cores with more of them. But essentially, people don't need to know, the general public don't need to know how many cores are in there, how much RAM, especially on the iPhones and the iPads. They don't really need to know how much RAM or any of that stuff is going on. They just need to know that this is the one to buy right now. And that's what Apple has made so simple with M1. Basically, if you want a current generation MacBook or Mac of any kind, really, you can either go for the M1, or very soon you can go for the M1X, which is the more powerful version. And it's very, very simple to know. And you will get the same performance really from M1, regardless of which kind of shape of computer you have it in, which makes all the sense in the world, because why should the shape of your computer dictate how fast it is? If you want to have a desktop with a display, or a desktop without a display, or you want to have a thin and light laptop, or you want to have a chunkier laptop that's got a bit more battery life and a few extra bells and whistles. You still get the same performance because it's the same chip, which is what M1 does so well, because it's powerful enough for pros and it's also efficient enough and cheap enough to produce that they can put it in their entry-level laptops. So that's why M1 makes a lot of sense. I think you're probably making the right choice of going for an M1 MacBook instead of going for one of the very confusing HP computers. And I don't think they do make specific code names for different manufacturers, for different retailers specifically. I mean, they might have their own editions occasionally, but there are certainly base level ones, and the chips inside the Intel, Intel processors have this very simple system for naming of like a 10800 something or other, and yeah, the numbers don't really make a lot of sense to me either, but they have i3s, i5s, i7s, i9s, and in many cases they're the same chip with bits disabled. It's very, very confusing, and yes, I think Apple is doing exactly the right thing on the simplicity side. So on that note, thank you so much for watching, guys. As I say, if you've got a question you want to ask in a future show, hashtag iCaveAnswers down in the comment section. If you've got this far through the video, a subscribe and a like would really be appreciated. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you in the next one.